Hello, welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasia Lavrina. Today we examine President Trump's explosive standoff with Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and how it ties into his confrontational global agenda. From trade wars to diplomatic ultimatums, the White House is pushing allies and adversaries alike into corners. President Trump has reignited tensions with Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, publicly declaring that Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. This follows Powell's cautious stance on interest rates, citing economic uncertainties stemming from Trump's tariff policies. Let's take a look.
The economy evolves broadly as expected, it will likely be appropriate to begin dialing back policy restraint at some point this year.
President Donald Trump has intensified his criticism of Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, accusing him of being too late and wrong in adjusting interest rates. In a recent Truth Social post, Trump expressed frustration over the Fed's decision to maintain rates between 4.25% and 4.5%, especially as the European Central Bank enacted its seventh rate cut of the year. Trump's remarks came shortly after Powell warned that the administration's sweeping tariffs could lead to stagflation, forcing the Fed to choose between combating inflation and supporting employment. Powell emphasized the risks of elevated inflation and unemployment due to the tariffs' impact on consumer prices and economic growth. Despite Trump's public pressure, Powell reaffirmed the Fed's independence, noting that the central bank operates under a mandate to ensure stable prices and maximum employment. He also highlighted that the Fed's decisions are based on economic data and not political considerations. The escalating tension between the White House and the Federal Reserve has raised concerns among investors and economists about potential political interference in monetary policy. Market analysts warn that undermining the Fed's independence could lead to increased financial instability and inflationary pressures. As the administration continues to implement aggressive trade policies, the Fed faces the challenge of navigating economic uncertainties while maintaining its commitment to data-driven decision-making.
Trump's 2025 foreign policy is less diplomacy, more deal table drama. He's weaponizing tariffs like negotiation tools, announcing crushing duties, then offering 90-day pauses as bait. It is the art of the deal turned global ultimatum. China took the hardest blow with 125% tariffs framed as retaliation for a $1 trillion trade gap. Trump's message, open your markets to U.S. tech, finance and energy or face economic isolation. Neighbors like Canada and Mexico avoided fresh duties, but only after fast pledges, fentanyl crackdowns, troop deployments and tight deadlines. Europe wasn't spared either. Trump's team wants defense budget raised to 5% of GDP, tech taxes crushed, and U.S. farm goods accepted. Refuse and auto, wine and steel tariffs are back on the table. Tokyo and Hanoi are told to ditch non-tariff barriers or lose access. The pressure is deliberate, aggressive and timed. These aren't negotiations, they're ticking time bombs designed to force capitulation. Trump wants deals that headline well: big-ticket U.S. purchase, border crackdowns, and public praise for his tactics. The World Trade Organization expects U.S.-China trade to plunge 80% this year. But for Trump, the scoreboard isn't stability, it's leverage. Every pause is just a calm before the next storm. Joining me now to discuss this in detail is geopolitical analyst Alex, Report5 in China, and A News Anita Sharma in the Netherlands. Warm welcome to our program. So Alex, let's start with you. Is Trump's tariffs and talks model a diplomatic strategy or a reckless gamble with the global economy?
Well, I think it's a high-stakes poker game where it keeps raising the bet, but risks folding the global economy. You know, this isn't diplomacy, it's brinkmanship, and tariffs used as a threat rather than a tool are actually destabilizing. You know, every pause feels less like negotiation and more like extortion wrapped in patriotism for his America First policy.
What impact could Trump's tariff pose strategy have on the EU coalition, especially among members with divergent trade exposures to Washington?
Well,
I'll pick that one up.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, please,
Alex.
Anita.
Oh, okay, you bet. First of all, very great to be with you both. You know, it's really interesting, right, to see how all this plays out. And Alex, as a fellow Canadian, I think you'll appreciate we've seen this take place the first go round back in 2018, but this time is hitting Canada especially hard, which I'm sure we'll get to in just a moment. But Anastasia, talking about EU cohesion, it's really interesting, right? What you've seen with the rhetoric, with the back and forth, mostly just the frontal aggression coming from the U.S., you're really seeing allies, and I put allies in quotation marks, you're seeing everyone actually come together. You're seeing Canadians from coast to coast to coast band together, regardless of political differences, to sort of come up with a unified response to sort of react to Trump. And on the European front, as you said, I'm here in Netherlands, you're seeing the various countries which on a good day don't get along with each other are now saying, look, we got to come together here. We have to have a cohesive strategy to deal with the United States, the world's biggest economy. We know that Prime Minister of Italy, Meloni, was in D.C. yesterday meeting with Trump. By all accounts and purposes, it looks like it was a positive meeting. But of course, she was sent on behalf of the EU to sort of be that bridge, right? That bridge, if you will, between the EU and between the United States to come to some sort of an agreement which doesn't have markets in turmoil and doesn't have countries in turmoil.
Yes, indeed, quite interesting, and we'll definitely come back to this point. But now, Alex, what long-term damage could this approach do to America's reputation as a reliable trade partner?
Well, let's talk reputation. America has the reputation of bomb, bankrupt, and bully. That has been their reputation for years now. But, you know, reputation is a... And right now, you know, America is burning through it fast. You know, partners don't know if they're signing deals or walking into traps. You know, these erratic policy swings turn trust into caution and caution into diversification that way actually from the U.S. That's, you know, a slow bleed of influence. This trade falls right into the arms of China. We are seeing it here as one by one countries join the Belt and Road Initiative here in China as they move away from America and as they de-dollarize. Well, it's going to be an interesting year for sure for this administration.
So we can say that it will have a bad consequences for American economy first, right?
That's an understatement.
Well, Anita, do you see Trump's 90-day reprieve as genuine negotiation windows or PR stance?
It's a great question, Anastasia. I think it's a bit of both, right? On the one hand, you know, either way, Trump will say that he's won. If he doesn't come on strong with his allies and his quote-unquote enemies, he will not want to be perceived as weak. So either way, if countries don't cave in, he wins. If they do cave in, he wins. So the bottom line here is he's imposed these huge tariffs. He then pauses them temporarily to get everyone scrambling to the negotiating table to essentially negotiate something they never intended to negotiate in the first place. Some would consider that in and of itself to be a win. You have Meloni in D.C. Now she's left D.C., gone back to Rome, where the Vice President of the United States will now follow suit, go to Italy, meet with her before he goes to another superpower, India. presumably to have talks with Modi and discuss all of this even further. So it remains to be seen how all of this will unfold, but Alex and you both touched on the fact that there's been turmoil, there's been volatility. We've seen that play out in the markets, but we also know that traders are feeling somewhat, maybe I could say optimistic, now that reciprocal tariffs are on hold, at least temporarily, to see if deals can eventually be cut. And these could, Alex, be deals that Trump hopes benefit the United States of America.
Alex, could these abrupt policy swings create uncertainty that discourages foreign investment in U.S. markets?
Absolutely. I think the buck stops right now. Forget it. If you're a Chinese investor wanting to invest in the U.S. market, no, don't do it. It isn't good. Look at TikTok right now. We are seeing a company that is pretty much going to be snatched by the American government. Who are the shareholders of this company? How much are they about to lose to an administration that just says, okay, well, we're gonna, great invention, fantastic, we're gonna take it. You know, investors hate volatility, and Washington is serving it by the bucket load. You know, today's tariff pause might be tomorrow's 125% shock. National boardroom, you've already calculated safer bets in Southeast Asia or the European Union. America's inconsistency is becoming, well, I think its biggest liability and the laughingstock of the world for certain.
Anita, more in details, how are U.S. allies reacting behind closed doors to what some call economic blackmail?
Yeah, it's an interesting time, right, Anastasia? I'm sure, you know, I would love to be the fly on the wall of these discussions and negotiations behind closed doors, as you say. But I'm sure a lot of these world leaders are sitting back and thinking, wait a second, you know, the United States is supposed to be our ally. If this is how you treat an ally, we'd hate to see how you treat one. We've seen how it would treat enemies. So we are seeing a new world order perhaps come to fruition, at least according to Trump. It looks like he wants to recreate some alliances, strengthen some, decrease his relationship with others that he seems to not deem beneficial for the U.S. In regards to volatility in the markets, we have actually seen something bizarre take place. During his first term, I was covering the markets quite extensively. I personally know a lot of people who actually made money during the volatility. You know, the old phrase, buy the dips and sell on the rips. You know, the volatility was an investor's best friend. You could just sit there in front of your computer and make scores of money just watching the markets go up and down, given, you know, on any day, depending on what he had to say, what Trump had to say about a world leader or about the markets or his trade plans. But getting back to negotiations, getting back to what world leaders could potentially be saying, I think it's time. I think they're really taking seriously what Trump has to say about perhaps outdated alliances, outdated strategies, and they're perhaps coming up with strategies behind closed doors to present to Trump imminently or within at least a few weeks to say, hey, we're ready to play ball, we're ready to at least meet you halfway and move forward on this.
Alex, within the last couple of weeks, I can read enough news and media sources are explaining the situation in different U.S. trade partnering countries, how this trade war can affect their economies. But you are joining our program today from China. Therefore, my question will be about the future of U.S.-China trade relations. With an 80% collapse in U.S.-China trade predicted, who really pays the price, Beijing or American consumers? Well, China's been around for 5,000 years. You're not going to fool them into a corner like Trump is trying to do here. And don't get me wrong, first policy, I kind of like that. You know, he has to try to bring that country back from the catastrophic 4 years it's had under the Biden administration.
But let's be honest here. I'm in the city of Guangzhou right now at the world's largest trade show, the Canton Fair, 137th time it's been here. And tariffs, irrelevant. Absolutely no one cares about it. The Chinese actually say, raise it as high as you want to raise it. You are only 6% of our market. We have another 154 countries here in the Belt and Road. Move on without you. The train is moving on. And if you're not on board, look out. Now, both sides do bleed, but it's first the American wallet that actually takes the first hit. Tariffs are kind of like a hidden tax on consumers. Prices go up at Walmart, on car lots too, and in construction. China loses, its share, but it's pivoting fast to Latin America, its own domestic market. We have to remember 1.5 billion people live here. Meanwhile, US buyers, well, they're dull. And that's where Jerome Powell is in a very, very difficult position. And Trump may have to sit there and actually take it, because it's not an easy road ahead.
Alex, one more question to you before I turn to Anita. Just recently, there were some news explaining the new trade policy of China, where China preferred to have more close trade relations with the neighboring countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, for example. Does it mean that there is a serious economic and trade changes in China are happening now, which will definitely have its long-term implications in the region?
Well, if you follow geopolitics here in China and you follow the two sons that China has, and they plan for 5 years. Anyone that's watched the policies of the government definitely understand that this is a government that is pivoting. They've been pivoting for a long time. They are going, nations like Europe, European Union countries, they're building those ties as they expand their Belt and Road, and they're going to continents like Africa. Instead of adopting those nations, they're actually investing in those nations, building partnerships and putting politics aside for the greater of the good earth. And they've got 154 countries on board. Good luck, America. Good luck.
Anita, can you say that this aggressive tactics isolating Washington at a time when global cooperation is more needed than ever?
There's no doubt, Anastasia, that global cooperation is needed. It's always welcomed, one would presume. I think the Trump administration is following the policy of, look, you're not going to get any progress without cracking some eggs. And boy, are they cracking the whole dozen here, right? To sort of get the world to stand up and pay attention. And that's exactly what happened here. Global cooperation, I think it's a bit of a waiting game, and it's also a question of timing. I agree with Alex. The trajectory is pointing towards China moving fast and furious ahead. It's built literally inroads in Africa. We saw the Panama Canal situation where we've seen just how much influence China has in a region that the US is now trying to regain control of. But still, it would behoove us, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring to attention that the consumer base of the United States of America is just absolutely behemoth. A lot of what's produced in China, even if it is a small percentage, it's still quite significant what goes to the US. If US consumers buy whichever way, higher tariffs, which increases the prices of goods, if in fact they decide or are forced to stop buying things eventually, not immediately, but eventually stop buying goods made in China, that will no doubt have an impact on China. Sure, it has other markets, but it is also in the interest of China to get on a better footing with the United States. We know that Xi Jinping has said, look, we're not afraid to fight back. And Anastasia, off the top of the show, you basically pointed to the fact that China has basically retaliated with what? Raising its tariffs on US goods to about 125% in answer to what the US has done. So it looks like both of these countries are ready to go head to head. But you mentioned the term behind closed doors. I'm sure behind closed doors, both of these powerhouses are anxious to cut some sort of a deal to move forward in some way, shape, or form that benefits both countries at the end of the day.
Well, Alex, Another important issue, which was also mentioned by me in the beginning of the show, can NATO allies realistically meet Trump's 5% GDP defense demand, or is this a way to break the alliance?
You know, this is less about defense and more about actually division. You know, most NATO countries can't hit 5% without slashing healthcare or even education. You know, it's politically toxic, if you ask me. Now, Trump knows this, and by setting an impossible bar, he's not asking for compliance. He's engineering friction. It's a pressure tactic. Once again, this is what he's used to, and that risks really, you know, I would say, pretty much putting NATO to the wall here. And it's going to be quite interesting. But once again, let's look at how effective NATO has been when it's fighting its proxy war through Ukraine to destabilize the Russian economy. Irrelevant. Hasn't worked. No matter how high you go, once again, this has been put to the test. So I don't know where they're really going with this. If they want to go to 5%, it may be because the United States has to dump more of its military industrial complex hardware on the buyers of European governments. I think that might be the strategy here in the long run.
Anita, it will be nice to listen your opinion on the same question about his demands to see 5% GDP among the NATO alliances. And also another question, is Trump's pressure on Canada and Mexico over fentanyl and migration more about optics than actual policy results?
Great questions all the way around. So on both fronts, Anastasia, it's my humble opinion that much like what Alex said, it's not really about the fentanyl. It's not really about getting these countries to spend more on defense. It's really, at the end of the day, showing a commitment to align with the U.S. It gives, you know, Trump loves the word leverage. And in a sense, he believes that by pushing all these countries to the brink in these areas, it's going to gain the United States more leverage in future negotiations, and more importantly, negotiations that center around China. Let's be frank here. At the end of the day, this really is all about the U.S. battle with China. The U.S. created China with its insatiable need for cheap manufactured goods, which U.S. companies were more than happy for decades to send over to China, essentially making companies in China very, very wealthy, making those cities very, very wealthy, looking at those magnificent buildings and houses and all of that, the richness that China enjoys, due to, in large part, that insatiable demand, consumer demand coming from the United States. Of course, today it may be a slightly different story. Like Alex said, China has a few more triggers to pull with respect to trading, increasing its trade with other countries and other continents, i.e. Africa. But still, at the end of the day, the U.S. believes it has some leverage, and by pushing countries and continents like the EU to sort of make some sort of a deal, he's hoping to shake up his allies a bit and say, hey, look, this is what we really have going on here. China, will you join me behind closed doors in this battle to help the U.S. and vis-a-vis his allies, i.e. Europe, to regain a footing? Because the United States sees what's happening here. Companies are telling Trump what's happening here, and it looks like he's trying to shore up a little bit of support to move the U.S. forward. But let's see what happens.
And Alex, my last question, could this big stick, short leash approach provoke retaliation that harms the very sectors Trump claims to protect?
Well, I don't think we're giving the Chinese enough credit here. We still think that they're sending plastic cups over to America. No, they are leading in many sectors around the world. Look at General Motors, look at Ford, look at a lot of these big three from eastern part of the United States. They're collectively done. They may be 500, but they are phantom companies. They used to be relevant here in China. They're nothing. The new energy vehicle market is taking over. It's roaring forward. We underestimate China's investment. And we have seen major companies come on board here, companies like DJI Technology. Let's not forget where these phones are made. We are sending tons of components over for making, actually, the automobiles in the United States. The assembly plants in the eastern part of the United States would go dark in a minute if the United States continues its rhetoric here against China. Once again, this is an economy that's matured, it's moved forward, it understands what the global economy takes and needs, and America is, well, China is long what America needs. And I'm telling you now, roll the dice, Donald, see what's going to happen, because you're going to be happy with the outcome. And I think, this is more of the administration's rhetoric, where they're playing by the old playbook maybe a decade or two ago, where they thought, no problem, we'll push the China. J.D. Vance's, arrogant response saying that Chinese are peasants. We're selling, Chinese peasants will sell, can give them money back. Total arrogance. JD, get on an airplane, walk the streets of Shanghai or Guangzhou or Shenzhen, and you will be in for one rude awakening, sir.
Indeed, very interesting. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of today's conversation. Trump's trade tactics mark a clear break from convention. High-stakes tariffs, short-term reprieves, and maximum pressure on partners. Critics argue it's more coercion than diplomacy, risking alliances and economic stability. While some see results, others see reputational fallout. As deadlines approach, the real question isn't who bets, but who breaks. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Anastasia Lavrina, and you have been watching Inside Politics. See you soon.